Tonight, it was 3 years ago tonight that Susan Powell was last seen.
In the years since Susan Powell disappeared, hundreds of tips, interviews, and searches have come up empty. There's been no sign of the mother of two since 2009, but her story has stayed in the headlines.
Developing news tonight in the case of Susan Cox Powell. It's been 8 years since she went missing.
She's been the subject of news reports, documentaries, and endless speculation about what really happened.
A lot of people just want to know, what you know about her disappearance. Can you tell us?
After years in the spotlight and under the microscope of police, her husband, Josh, took his secrets to the grave, along with their two children. But there were some secrets he left behind.
Tonight, KSL cracks open the secret Susan Powell case files.
And what we're about to show you is only the beginning here. Investigative reporter Dave Colley has spent the last 3 years painstakingly chronicling all the evidence detectives had in this confounding case for a riveting serial podcast, and we're calling this Cold.
Yeah, this has certainly been a laborious and eye-opening journey. These new secrets in the Susan Powell saga giving us new unparalleled insight into one of Utah's biggest and most disturbing mysteries.
Dozens of files, tens of thousands of documents, journals, and letters, tape after tape of home videos, and Josh's own eerie audio journals.
Susan makes me want to live better so that we can love each other and stay together forever.
Combined, they are the tangible testimony to years of arduous detective work aimed at finding a woman who simply vanished.
Hey, Susan, I'm just worried about you.
But in sorting through all the old evidence, we discovered brand new revelations, including Josh's minute-by-minute movements in the first days after Susan's disappearance, and new details about that mysterious drive in a rental car.
He put like 800 miles on that rental car. He was driving to meet Michael, somewhere between here and Washington.
Anyway, I just wanted to get you in that dress.
The shocking true extent of Steve Powell's obsession and even stalking of his daughter-in-law.
I started massaging her legs. I would have loved to go all the way up her legs.
And then, hidden in Josh's journals,
I don't have to worry about whether or not I will get hurt.
we found a woman not even police knew existed until we told them.
What was it like living with Josh?
This is Catherine Everett,
When we first moved there,
Josh's first and only other serious girlfriend.
he was always the ultimate winner.
Catherine may have the most insight into who he really was and what he was capable of.
At the time, of course, I thought I was happy.
In digging deeper into Catherine's life with Josh and his marriage to Susan, some startling similarities emerged. Josh met both women at local church events.
The first time I met him was an activity.
No coincidence, says Susan's father, Chuck Cox.
I definitely felt like he was shopping in LDS areas for young girls who believed in the happy marriage and listened to your husband.
He didn't want me to have any friends. He only wanted me to have him.
Josh controlled with isolation.
He needed a cell phone, she didn't need one.
And in both relationships, he managed the money.
Every time I got my check, he'd have me sign it, and then he'd stick it in his account.
She was working because he wouldn't work. In that way, she was basically just an asset or a slave.
I was an asset to him.
But Catherine Everett got away.
It's actually kind of creepy. He really kept me on a short leash, and I didn't even realize that that's what was going on.
And neither did Susan.
She was eternally optimistic.
In first-time interviews for Cold, detectives detailed dead ends and turning points in the investigation.
Yeah, that opened the door for us.
And the one thing they believe would have forced Josh to reveal what really happened. Josh Powell, of course, was never arrested in his wife's disappearance or her presumed murder. But for years, it seemed police were just one piece of evidence away, and Josh was somehow just one step ahead.
I think his guilty conscience was slowly eating away at him.
3 years, thousands of files, more than 24 new interviews.
The evidence, his story, spotlight right on one guy.
Cold examines the Susan Powell story you have not heard, starting with the woman who got away, only to see her ex-boyfriend's face on the TV 10 years later.
Are you sure it's really him? And I'm like, yeah, it's really him. This is not going to end well. Knowing the way that he was, ultimately, I think we all know that was the case.
Catherine has never spoken about her relationship with Josh to anyone outside of her family before now. And she wasn't alone. I've talked to a dozen people who were finally ready to break their silence. We've looked through the evidence and even conducted our own tests to try and determine what one key piece of evidence still unidentifiable to the FBI could have been. And I explore the one question, besides where is Susan, that the world wanted answered. Why wasn't any of this ever enough to arrest Josh?
And Dave, there is so much information here. How did you get your hands on all of this evidence?
Yeah, I mean, this was certainly a process that took years. New requests, document requests. We traveled from Utah to Washington and back to try to track down evidence that had been lost or set aside, mislaid, and it's all coming out now for the first time.
All right. Very interesting. You've spent years working on this, and I can't wait to check out the podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
And it is a Susan Powell story none of us have heard, and we are giving you early access to our new Cold podcast series. Episode 1, originally due out tomorrow, is available right now on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and Stitcher.